Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy site. Today is Tuesday, September 28th, 2021, and I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How are you doing, Trev?
I'm doing good. Been playing some games.
Keeping it simple.
Watching some stuff. Been a good few weeks.
Yeah, we were just talking about The Green Knight off air before we started recording. It is surely a motion picture film, and as we record this, the premiere of No Time to Die is happening in the UK right now. That's exciting. Is there going to be a little bit of a full circle nature to this episode at the end in shoutouts? Who can say? Who can say? But unfortunately, this is not a podcast about James Bond yet. And so instead,
it could have been last week, but we didn't defend GoldenEye far enough into our 3.5 hour epic.
If it had truly been our bracket, we would have seen greater James Bond representation make it past the first round. I think GoldenEye got knocked out in maybe second round. But no, we were talking, unfortunately, about Quantic Dream. The old whipping horse of input back in the day has made its ugly head back into That News You Care About. And this story really is covering two different features, one from Eurogamer, one from Kotaku, about Quantic Dream and its litany of lawsuits, defamation suits against various organizations. The first story that we're going to kind of focus on, even though these are, I think, very connected, is dealing with a Eurogamer story about a suit that Quantic Dream lost. Second one that we'll talk to in a second is one that it won, but also lost, because otherwise it'd be too simple. And what's the fun in that? So yes, jumping into the first story from Eurogamer. And it's not super long, and it comes from the writer of the piece is Tom Phillips over at Eurogamer, and the headline is French outlet which successfully defended itself from Quantic Dream bosses lawsuit releases statement. That's why anyway. But yes, the French investigative news outlet Mediapart has published a statement after being cleared of all defamation charges filed by Quantic Dream executives. And it's the first formal statement to come from them in the wake of the suit. It's not really much to it, I think, honestly. And the story kind of mainly just gets into the particulars of the suit. I thought it was interesting, though. Trevor shared it because, yeah, the suit failed on every case. They go into it here about how the first, three parts of the first three passages were quickly dismissed by the court, while four were examined further. I think, for me, it's interesting because these all relate to the series of investigations into the toxic culture around Quantic Dream and David Cage and just really the entire culture, right? The Sun King. But yeah, they basically came out that they, report was written in good faith, was in the public interest, and that it had approached both David Cage and another executive from Quantic Dream who's got a very French name that I won't pretend to butcher. Guillaume
de Fondemier.
Fondemier, yeah, probably what I would have done too. But yes, as reported earlier, legal action by Quantic Dream against Le Monde had also failed. Again, foreshadowed in a future piece. But Cage's and de Fondemier's, I'm going to go with again, personal case against Le Monde did succeed. I think for me, these two stories, some kind of bouncing back and forth between them, are interesting both because A, the failure of the suits, right, and B, the kind of success against the personal case that they had against Le Monde. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll throw it to you first, Trevor, and kind of get your initial thoughts on the Eurogamer and Kotaku pieces and kind of the state and nature of the suits that Quantic Dream and David Cage and, De Fondemier had waged against Le Monde and Mediapart.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was like I just saw this pop up, and I remembered that Quantic Dream was such a topic for you while in your input days,
Yeah, I
and
was always there.
I had largely forgotten these cases that stem back to like 2018, when the pieces were written, because that was pre. That was probably in the era between input and before that nerdy site launched. So it was one of those, like I even went, I was like, did we ever cover this on this show? No, we just like we've not been doing this show that long. So I even had to go back and kind of refresh, but it was more of a like, hey, I remember Logan loves kind of like taking shots at Cage and Quantic Dream, and hey, they here's a case where they lost a lawsuit. It's interesting because there's a lot of like there's a significant language barrier in this. Even the article here from Eurogamer links the statement, and the statement is entirely in French, and I'm like, I can't read that and I can't translate it. And so they kind of summarize it in the Eurogamer article, talking about here are the kind of the points that they bring up, and they and how they defended. But then there's also this whole other issue of like libel laws are clearly different in France compared to the US, where it's like I feel like this wouldn't even see a courtroom here in the States, but it was able to at least this and the other ones were able to at least make its way into court, and as we kind of touched on, like the David Cage wins one of the suits while losing this one, basically, and it's interesting because they were largely intertwined, and a lot of them are like reporting on the same thing. So it's just a matter of like, okay, apparently maybe these guys, maybe it was that because these guys reached out for comment before publishing, and maybe the other one didn't. I don't know what the difference between the suits was, why why one of them wins versus the other one.
It gets into like, one potentially divulge in anonymous sources, whereas like Le Mans didn't, and that being a potential factor as well in terms of like the burden of proof that need to be met in the courtroom as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was more as a just kind of a, here's the button on this story that started 3 years ago, even though like rumors and speculation and stories coming out of Quantic Dream have been going on for years and years and years. I feel like I remember before all of this, there was that whole like now Elliot page kind of talking about being frustrated with their time working on, was that Beyond Two Souls, and the idea that like they had scanned a naked version of their body, that it was just like, oh yeah, that doesn't sound like a cool a cool place, and so I think this was like stemming back to reports talking about those kinds of things and talking about the hostile environment of the organization, that I wonder if it were like a US based organization, if it would be getting the kind of coverage that like Activision Blizzard is getting now. That's certainly, I think, like, I feel like it got like a news cycle or two back in 2018 when this came up, and maybe more because you guys apparently covered it on input as much as you did. But it definitely feels like this was more of like a drop in the bucket in terms of like the stories around the industry for this last week. Like I saw a handful of these, but even if like Google Quantic Dreams news from this last week, it's like this, and then rumors about a Star Wars game that they may or may not be working on right now, and there wasn't a ton of coverage breaking through on this story. And maybe that is just because it's kind of I guess it's like the suits were actually like they wrapped up earlier in September, and this was more like kind of the a post-mortem, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, it's just I think there's an element of this that is, it's not a story that like really got grabbed on by American press, so I feel like there isn't as much coverage as I would have, expected to see on a story like this, especially because like a lot of the industry likes punching on Quantic Dream. As you kind of mentioned before we even started recording, one of the Kotaku articles talks about Quantic Dream as creators of, quote, so bad they're bad games like Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human. Like everybody, even if people like their games, people do not have any problem kind of like highlighting the weaker elements of storytelling that they have, or the speculation around the problems around the studio. So it strikes me as odd, even then, I guess, that like this didn't get more play, or maybe it's because they won one of the things that like they didn't really want to highlight, like the success that David Cage has. I don't know.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting going to that point you made earlier in terms of like the difference between libel laws in the States. It's not even so much as France as much as it is the US is some of the most generous protections for like free speech of like anywhere in the world in terms of like the press and like the burden of entry, right? Like the Kotaku article kind of goes into it a bit more in depth where, this is pulled from like an excerpt there where like establishing truth in French libel cases can be notoriously difficult. You have to prove not only that what you're saying is true, but that you had all of the relevant evidence at time of publication. All of this burden falls upon the defendant. In refusing to disclose its sources to the court, Le Monde may have been unable to prove that the information was verifiably sourced, even if it was true. So it kind of goes into the difference between that versus the US, where the burden of kind of interest falls upon the person suing it, right? They have to prove that there is an undue burden placed on them, right? They're kind of being put upon, and the burden becomes, almost insurmountable if you're a public figure like David Cage would be in this circumstance. It has to be done with like malicious intent in U.S. cases, and it's incredibly hard to prove malicious intent in publication of a story. That's why it very rarely happens. And so I think that juxtaposition, right? This is a court case that would have gotten thrown out so early in the U.S., right? Like it'd have been such a like boom and you're done thing. And so that I think makes it interesting, right? This kind of reality of like, France and England in particular has very strict laws on what can and can't be published, and the burden is really intense there in terms of, really verifying every single tiny detail is true. And so I think that makes it an interesting aspect of it. I think another thing is this idea that it has kind of just been bubbling under the surface for 3 years now, right? Like you said, like there hasn't been that much talk about it. And I don't know if it's because of the fact that, it's a French-based company. I don't know if it's the fact that Quantic Dream hasn't had a game come out in 3 or 4 years. So they've kind of been out of the eye a bit more. They've been able to just kind of, slide into the background. But this to me was one of the first big stories of like a really egregiously toxic workplace culture. Like you mentioned, we talked about Quantic Dream frequently on Input, in 2016, 2017, 2018. And so to me, I always think of Quantic Dream and David Cage at the forefront of toxicity in gaming culture, being one of the, at the vanguard of the current kind of movement in terms of discussing toxic cultures. And so it's always kind of surprising when I realize that not everyone is kind of on the same page necessarily as Quantic Dream. And I think a not insignificant part of why maybe it doesn't get as much attention, aside from it being, a European-based studio, aside from it being a language barrier situation, and aside from not having any major releases in a couple years, is the fact that the games, I think, are viewed as kind of fine, right? And so I think there's this idea of like, the studio is kind of whatever, right? Like they don't make huge blockbuster games. Their games don't sell like gangbusters. They're just kind of a whatever studio. You have to be kind of into the industry to begin with. versus, Activision Blizzard. I mean, that is a behemoth in the industry, right? That's going to get a lot of attention. That they make games constantly that come out multiple times a year kind of thing. And you can be very much on like the fringes of gaming and still understand the ramifications of what like an Activision Blizzard, scandal would do. And so I wonder how much of an impact that has as well. But making a mistake, the culture at Quantic Dream certainly was incredibly toxic, and I have seen very little evidence to suggest that there has been any sort of major changes or reforms inside the culture of Quantic Dream, right? And I frequently will make the joke and reference the Sun King David Cage, but it's not a joke. The kind of, I think, degree of narcissism and like egocentric, persona that he has in that studio and how he kind of carries himself there, right? And the stories, I think it's important to kind of refresh everyone's memory of Quantic Dream's culture in terms of, racist and sexist and like anti-Semitic messages and images plastered on like stuff, and Nazi symbols in the workplace, and constantly making like sexist jokes were rife with the studio when these reports first broke. And I think, in the midst of them winning a case and winning a second case but losing another case, and the kind of complicated nature of that, and the language barrier, and also just time having passed, it's important to remember that that is what this is all about to begin with. And we've seen very little, if any, real change in studios in the 4 years since then for all the people working there.
Yeah, I mean I guess the button on this part of the show is the Kotaku headline for kind of their take on it of Detroit dev Quantic Dream wins lawsuit without actually disproving misconduct allegations. So like they didn't have to because of the laws in France there.
In
like
France.
they didn't say we didn't do any of this. They didn't have to say we didn't do any of this. They just had to basically like attack the news organizations that published the allegations for not doing due diligence or whatever they needed to do. So still their name is not cleared.
It is it's unfortunate, and I think it is it's a shame that they were able to just drag the French media outlets through these lawsuits for like 4 years now, that weren't able to get kind of dismissed out sooner, and one is continuing against Le Monde because they don't want to divulge anonymous sources, which is like a bedrock of American journalism, but hopefully that will get resolved against Quantic Dream, because David Cage and company maybe should actually try to change things instead of just complaining about the unflattering news stories. But that's it for Quantic Dream. That's our Quantic Dream hour. Instead, we're going to talk about fun things, Trevor. Recently, you might not have heard about it, Nintendo had a Direct, and the internet was fairly ablaze with people having all kinds of thoughts, really mainly one unified thought on the announcement of the Mario movie, and the cast reveal. We're going to kind of go through these one by one through like the major cast announcements, I think, 'cause it's more fun for me. But I will just very quickly do a quick synopsis of what were your initial thoughts seeing the cast list? And more importantly, did you have the same seemingly visceral reaction as the rest of the internet did, Trevor?
I don't know if I had like a visceral reaction. So I was recording my, like, as I often do with these things, I was recording my reactions. I never end up publishing them or anything because I'm not a very, vivacious reactor or anything like that. But when they came up, I was like, okay, for that first one. And then the rest of them, I was like, oh, okay. It's like, those are all better. Oh, that's interesting. So apparently the movie's going to go in that direction. Okay. So I was more like confused and bemused than anything. And yeah, with the initial one, I was like, huh, all right. Like, ultimately, my takeaway was, oh, I mean, this, like, it's the studio behind the Minions movies. I'm not expecting this to be targeted to me. Like, best case scenario, this ends up being like a Sonic movie where it's like it's clearly geared towards kids, but has enough like winks and nods to like the 30 some odd people,
Sonic movie's great.
the 30 somethings that came up and grew up with Sonic. Like, hopefully there's like hints of that in the Mario movie, but I'm also just just knowing those kinds of movies and how Illumination kind of, like, I know that they're not for me. I'm not expecting to enjoy the Super Mario movie, but we'll see, maybe. I also tweeted out in response to obviously like the big one being Chris Pratt as Mario. I tweeted out like the thing that I feel like should have been my most viral tweet ever, and the fact that like it barely got any traction. I'm like, yeah, okay, I either don't have like a follower base that is going to make anything viral, or I just don't understand Twitter. Like, maybe that's it, because I tweeted out the meme of from Jurassic World of like Chris Pratt like holding his hands out to keep the raptors at bay, and made a joke about Mario and Yoshi's, and just went nowhere, and I was bummed by that.
That was good. You did have a good tweet last week that was just a Logan and Trevor tweet, but I really appreciated it.
Thank you. The Fantastic Beasts one, yeah.
Yeah, it was very good. That was very good. But yes, so I mean, let's just hop right into the cast. Like Trevor said, Chris Pratt is Mario. People have lots of opinions. Again, mainly centered around negative ones about Chris Pratt being Mario. I mean, I don't know. We're in the Chris Pratt era to some degree, and we just kind of all have to live with it, right? Like, he is a enormously successful movie star, right? And so, like, I can't remember who had like a mini thread about this, about the fact that like this movie is not for us. Like, we're gonna see the movie no matter what, pretty much. Like, if you're in the games, like we are, you're gonna watch a movie. You might complain and bitch about it, but you're gonna watch a movie, so they don't really care. It's to kind of expand it beyond that, to make this be a really successful movie, like the Sonic movie was, but even more so, right? Because Mario is even more of an institution. That's what they care about. And bringing in someone like Chris Pratt and the rest of the cast that we'll get to does that. And I don't think that is, flawed logic at all, right? I think Chris Pratt has even demonstrated a ability to do really well in animated performances. I think of his kind of role in the Lego movie, obviously.
Yep.
And I think, it's important to remember that just because people on the internet don't like Chris Pratt for totally deserved reasons does not mean that most people dislike Chris Pratt, or just as importantly, even know why people don't like Chris Pratt, right?
Yeah,
like, if
absolutely.
you just watch Parks and Rec and you just watch the Lego movie and you watch Jurassic World, you think, and Guardians of the Galaxy and Marvel, you're like, Chris Pratt's super charming and he's funny and he's having a great time and he seems like a super normal dude, right? And it's like, yeah, like, I'm totally down for more Chris Pratt in my movies, right? And that's an easy thing to think. And so I think, and now he's married to a Kennedy, I think, or Schwarzenegger Kennedy. And so, yeah, he's married to Arnold Schwarzenegger's daughter. That's right. Fun fact about Chris Pratt.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes total business sense from that perspective, right? Like, obviously, would I have loved for them to have had the voice of Mario for like almost 40 years as the voice of Mario? Sure. But, was that ever realistically going to happen? Almost certainly not, right? Like, almost certainly was never really a chance. I think the idea that we even got, the cameo performances by, like, I think that is sort of its own, like, catch, because they could just easily have been like, you get nothing. We're making a AAA Hollywood movie. We got Chris Pratt. We don't need anything else. So, like, from that side of things, I think the decision to have Chris Pratt makes a lot of sense. And he seems like someone who will have a lot of fun with that performance. And, also, it is a not insignificant thing to remember that Mario doesn't talk that much. I don't know what Mario's gonna look like in the movie, but like, you know, Mario is famous for saying like 7 lines, and so I'll be curious to see what they do with him in the movie. I'll be curious about the movie in general. Like, obviously he's gonna have way more lines. I'll have like actual dialogue he's saying, but I'm curious to see what it looks like. And one thing I will say is I'm actually excited about the movie, right? Like, I think there is something to be had for doing a really cool Mario story, because like we talked about literally a week ago when we did the bracket podcast, right? Like, one of the things that I think holds Mario games back for you to some degree is the fact that there isn't really a story in any of them, with maybe, you know, the exception of like Galaxy, right? Or maybe like Odyssey to some parts of that, right? And so I think I'm really curious to see what they can do with this, like an actual narrative driven Mario experience, and what that looks like, and what that is, and what that version of Mario has to become in order to do that and facilitate like a 90-minute to 2-hour long runtime. And because Chris Pratt, if he's doing a Chris Pratt role, that is going to be a very different version of Mario than we have pretty much ever seen before, in terms of like being way more like goofy and silly and kind of out there. Right. And I think I find that sort of exciting as someone who loves Mario as much as I do. But also, you know, am excited to see new iterations of that character, and am excited to see new things done with this, you know, person. So yeah, I'm excited for that. Even more so when we tag it into the second big announcement of Charlie Day's Luigi, and that energy is super strange to me, right? Like that's what I'm saying. Like, the energy and vibe of this movie is super interesting to me, right? Like, it's hard to nail down, right? Like, Chris Pratt is not a straight man. Like, he just doesn't really ever play a straight man in anything he's done. And so Charlie Day, also not known for playing a straight guy, and his, you know, comedic performances, they're each very much always kind of the class clown, cartoonish, larger than life characters. And so that energy bouncing off each other, I'll be very curious to see what they do with that. Like, it very much has the feel already of like, I think a like Lord and Miller like Lego movie kind of vibe, just like incredibly zany and antic filled, and just like all of these larger than life characters. And so yeah, I mean, I'm really curious to see what they do with Mario and Luigi, who obviously are the two kind of key characters here. If they'll let Luigi be like a sad, mopey Luigi who just is into like hunting ghost, I think that'd be rad if Luigi is just really sad and depressed by Charlie Day. And yeah, if they make Mario like kind of into like, you know, this larger than life, like, you know, maybe he thinks he's smarter than he actually is character. Maybe he like, I don't know, like, but those two characters, neither one's playing a like level-headed person, presumably, and I find that really interesting. Anna Taylor-Joy is Peach. Just yes, love that decision. She could play like an IRL Peach, and it would still be perfect, basically. Yeah, and so those big three, I'll kind of get your thoughts, and we've brought in Luigi and Peach as well. Where are your kind of thoughts coming into that core kind of trio of Mario characters?
Yeah. So yeah, I on the Chris Prattness, like there are definitely two versions of Chris Pratt now. There is like the comedic oaf kind of Chris Pratt, and then there's like action star Chris Pratt that does play it a little bit more straight. And yeah, he'll have like a one-liner here or there, but like the last thing I watched Chris Pratt in was the Tomorrow War in like an Amazon Prime movie or whatever, and it's like he's just doing action in that one. Really, he's like, there's not really like comedic beats in that one, and I don't expect like Mario to be that either, so it is probably going to be more on the goofy side of things. And to your point, I mean, like in the reveal, Shigeru Miyamoto you know, was talking about, he's very excited for Chris-san, and Mario will be talking a lot in the movie. And so like part of to going back to the Charles Martinet thing, like, yeah, Mario hasn't talked a lot, and he's been doing the role, I looked it up, since 1995, because obviously also before that we had Bob Hoskins, and then before that we had, you know, Captain Lou Albano in the on the TV show when I was growing up, and like, so you had like a gruffer Italian Mario then, and then you had, whimsical Charles Martinet that's been doing it. But like, it might just be that like Charles Martinet like can't have a whole story of just doing that, very cartoonish accent. And like, I feel like if you had a whole story of Mario doing that voice the entire time, it would be incredibly grating. So that's why, like, in most Mario games, not everything is voiced, and it is just like his catchphrases.
Very little is voiced by Mario. Yeah.
So like, I think that version of Mario works for the kinds of games that they make. Whereas like if it was a Last of Us like epic, having to listen to "It's a me, Mario" for 2 hours or 10 hours would be like, oh my god, I want to murder Mario. Like, so I think having to, rein that in, and whatever Chris Pratt's gonna do with it, like, we'll see. I'll be curious if it is like, if he does play with like an Italian thing, or if he is like New York plumber, a la like the 1993 Bob Hoskins version. I admittedly have never really watched Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is the biggest, obviously Charlie Day's kind of biggest claim to fame. So I don't like, I've seen him pop up in things here and there, but I really don't know what to like. I don't have a great sense of him just as a performer. I'm sure it'll be funny, because that's what I expect from anybody really coming from It's Always Sunny, despite having never watched the show. So yeah, like, I'm also curious about the energy that those two in particular will have together. And then Anya Taylor-Joy, has very much like very quickly become like I enjoy her in pretty much anything she does, be it the Split movie, or Queen's Gambit last year in particular was like, oh, she's really good in this. And so yeah, I'm excited to see her continue to pop up in things, and the fact that she's gonna be Princess Peach is a cool little element. So shout out to her getting the opportunity on that. I hope that the movie doesn't just make her a damsel in distress, as Peach so often is. Like, I hope she has agency, and I hope they kind of take that and subvert those expectations with her. And I think someone like Anya Taylor-Joy can, and hopefully will, do that and bring kind of that energy to it. She doesn't seem like the kind of person that would have accepted the role if it was just going to be Princess Peach stuck in a castle or something like that. So yeah, I like her being like the second person like announced. I was like, oh, okay, that's I'm much more bought in now versus like it just being Chris Pratt. Like, Chris Pratt is oh, I mean, like, that's a great thing. And then also a whole bunch of people were like digging up old tweets, and there was like a tweet from like 2016 or 2017 or something like that of like Shigeru Bill Trinan tweeting at Chris Pratt's Twitter account, Bill Trinan being Miyamoto's basic like main translator with Nintendo, like talking about how pleased Miyamoto had been to meet Chris Pratt for whatever they'd been doing. And it's like, oh, maybe that's when the seeds were planted of Chris Pratt playing Mario all these years later. Maybe like that's been in the works since then, and animation just takes time. So yeah, like I'm curious, and yeah, I'm sure eventually go see this. Probably Cam and I will go see it or something like that. But I'm still not expecting it to be great. But I like these elements of the voice cast like mean it's going to be better than it might have been otherwise, I guess.
Yeah. I think moving to the next one, right, with Jack Black as Bowser, that is such a fantastic selection, I think. Like, I don't know what I would have imagined a like continuously speaking voice of Bowser to sound like, but somehow Jack Black is exactly it. I think that is a selection that like fits so well.
I was a big fan of Dorkly, which was basically like the video game nerdy spin-off of College Humor years ago. They they produced a series of like videos with like, Mario and Sonic and video game characters and stuff, and their Bowser was always like a very like put upon kind of Bowser. And it was a funny take and stuff like that, and that's what I think of probably when I think of like Bowser versus like rah, ha, ha, because that's really all you get from the games. So yeah, I like the idea of Jack Black as Bowser, especially because just the energy and humor that Jack Black brings. Yeah. Again, like this kind of casting is like, oh, that's the direction they're going with the Super Mario movie. That fits perfectly in line with, Steve Carell being Gru in Despicable Me and stuff like that. And like, that's like, I fully expect it to be that kind of like humor of, he's going to be kind of poking fun at the fourth wall, if not outright breaking the fourth wall. And Jack Black has certainly been fun in a lot of recent things, in particular, like in video game adjacent things like Jumanji, which I know you finally saw for the first time not too long ago. So yeah, like he clearly like has an enjoyment of this, I mean, obviously he's worked with, on a number of Tim Schafer games and stuff like that too. So like he loves games. And so I imagine he will, sorry, my light just keeps going out. I'm sure he will love kind of the opportunity to relish playing Bowser.
Next up, we've got Keegan-Michael Key as Toad. I don't even know what to do with that information. That is such a like. I love Keegan-Michael Key. Someone who's loved him since he was on Mad TV like 15 years ago. Been a huge fan of his for so long. That is such a weird decision. I don't even know what to think of for Toad now. That is not who would have initially come to my mind for that character. And so I'm very curious to see his take on what Toad looks like.
Yeah, I think that especially is like, oh, so this isn't going to be like whiny, neurotic Toad that we usually get. I feel like this is going to be a very sarcastic, like Mario and Luigi like leaning on Toad for something, and it being Keegan-Michael Key being like, oh, why is it got to be me doing this or something like that. Did you see the somebody took the famous Aaron sketch from Key and Peele and did it all in like Toad's voice, and was like, oh my god, like I don't expect it to be that, but it'll be I'm sure it'll be funny.
It'd be very funny. Next up we have Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. Again, such a bizarre, like it fits really well. Like that laugh, I feel like will definitely come into play as Donkey Kong, but it's a very interesting choice. Now we're kind of entering into like, these are interesting decisions section of the list. And this is one where it's like, I'm curious to see how involved Donkey Kong will be. I'm curious to see what his role in the play will be. This is very clearly, we're already kind of branched into the larger extended Mario universe, not just doing a Mario origin story. Or maybe we are. Maybe it begins with Donkey Kong at the beginning of the movie and we're rescuing Pauline. I don't know, but Seth Rogen, I think his laugh alone, I was like, that makes it worth it. Just for his laugh is very Donkey Kong-esque, I think.
Yeah, that's this was the first one where I was like, okay, now I'm just completely lost. It being like, and though he's not, because they in the video they're like, and while he's not part of the core Mario family, Seth Rogen will be playing Donkey Kong. It's like, okay, so this is now no longer just an exclusively Mario. I mean, obviously it can, because of course Mario and Donkey Kong are intertwined in a pre-Bowser world, but it is very much like, okay, so and this coupled with the news that like broke, I want to say yesterday, of like they're working on a Donkey Kong expansion to the Mario Land in Universal Studios theme park in Japan and stuff. Like, oh, okay, like this strikes me as the movie's going to be maybe more like Wreck-It Ralph, even, in that like it's going to be a little bit like broader scope of the core Mario stuff, in that like Wreck-It Ralph 2 especially, it's like, hey, they are poking fun at the fact that like Disney is owned by, or like that Disney owns Star Wars and all this other stuff, and Marvel, so you have like all the Disney princesses in that movie and like Star Wars things and stuff in that movie. So like the fact that they're leaning into like Donkey Kong is going to be here, and then it's going to be the unmistakable voice of Seth Rogen, who, like, I mean, having enjoyed his brief bits in Invincible earlier this year, like, he'll be fun. I don't know. Again, I don't know necessarily what to expect from this Donkey Kong, but like,
yeah,
I'm not going to be mad about Seth Rogen playing that character, as opposed to, again, just like grunting sounds that we've had from the games for however long.
40 years, right? Fred Armisen is Cranky Kong, which again leads me. Again, it goes. This is one of the ones where I saw him was like, "What is this?" I think this is the moment for me that you had with Donkey Kong, where it's like, because if you have Donkey Kong, and it could be definitely a think of like that could be the beginning of the movie, right? Is Mario, right? Is Jumpman and Donkey Kong's battle, and then that ends and it goes into like Mario's a hero now, or just that's a big moment kind of thing. When you bring in Cranky Kong, you're doing a very specific kind of thing now, where like the Kong family is a much bigger part of this once you start bringing in the other Donkey Kong members, right? And so that for me was the one for me was like, what is this story?
Yeah, and I mean, it's been so long since I've like watched these like did you know gaming videos or whatever, but I feel like the whole thing was like Cranky Kong is actually Donkey Kong from the Donkey Kong versus Jumpman / Mario games, and then the Donkey Kong that we now have in like the Donkey Kong Country Donkey stuff Kong is like Jr. his kid or whatever. Yeah. Notably, no Diddy Kong announced in any of this stuff, but yeah, it's bullshit. So it will be interesting if that is Fred Armisen and Chris Pratt have a past or something like that, and like it's Fred Armisen just kind of telling it, and Seth Rogen being like, "I know, Dad." That's a terrible Seth Rogen impression.
Yeah, I mean it's a weird one, and I think seeing the whole Nintendo Direct for the Mario movie section and getting even into like the weird stuff there of like, how deep into the lore of Mario are they going to go, and Donkey Kong are they going to go, right, and like Spike in his role, right, and like as like Mario's boss and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting because even reading this like inverse article that I'm looking at for this stuff about like even it goes into how like Cranky Kong, the idea that he's the original Donkey Kong that Mario fought, right? But like none of it's canonical, obviously, and how it's like maybe this will be the film that like makes it officially canon, where like Cranky Kong's the original Donkey Kong and not Donkey Kong, because God forbid we have him be a villain for 5 years. Right, I'm definitely curious about it from that perspective. I'm definitely curious about what they do with the lore and their ability to do really cool things with Mario lore, right? And to shake it up and to do different interpretations of that, and to have, to be able to look back on, God, by the time it comes out, 40 years of Mario history, and say, what do we want to do with that? What do we like about that lore? What do we like about the history of Mario? What do we not like, maybe? What do we want to kind of tweak and do their own fun interpretation on, right? And I think that's super exciting. I think no matter what, the movie's going to be a really different take on Mario and its characters, and, the periphery characters like Donkey Kong and Cranky Kong. Do I think that it's going to be a smash success? I have no idea. But the bar has been set by Sonic, and, Mario routinely brings his A game when Sonic brings his B game. And so I'm excited to see what it does. I'm excited to see what it looks like, because Sonic 2 comes out is it next year that Sonic 2 comes out, or is it 2023? So it's gonna be right around, either way, it's gonna be right around when Sonic 2 comes out. And so that'll make it kind of exciting as well to kind of get these two video game movies back to back. Because right now, Sonic 2 is possibly Sonic 1 is certainly in the run of being the best like video game movie. I'm excited to see what Mario can do to change that.
Sonic 2 is scheduled for April 8th, 2022. and this was slated as like a holiday December. 2022.
Yeah. So there we go. I'm excited. The year of the two big 90s video game mascots.
I had completely forgotten that Idris Elba is going to be Knuckles in Sonic 2.
Hell yeah, he is.
I forgot that got
we don't deserve it.
That got announced. Yeah, that's going to be.
Yeah, we don't deserve it.
That's going to be crazy. Yeah, it. The Mario one's going to be very interesting, and I feel like it being Nintendo, like they're not really competing with Sonic. Like they're not trying to make that same movie. They are making a kids animated movie. Like that is what they're doing. It's not live action mix. Like even talking about like the idea of like how deep in the weeds is this going to get with canon, I'm like, this is not going to be a canon movie in the same way that like the series from the 90s is not like canon TV or whatever. Like it's not canon. Like Nintendo has never cared about canon really. Like Mario,
except for Zelda, and it doesn't make any sense.
And no, like, and that's again, like, Nintendo doesn't care about canon for Zelda. They took a fan theory and were like, sure, let's go ahead and like we can embrace that and like sell a book on it or whatever. Like those games were all made independent of one another. There's never been like a grand plan over Zelda. Like that is pie in the sky dreams. Like if they want to tell a Zelda story that breaks from canon, they're gonna tell a Zelda story that breaks from canon and then just kind of like rework it into the canon, retcon it into the canon. Like Nintendo doesn't care about canon. Like they have not. So like I don't expect that to carry over into the movies and suddenly like that's going to be a big thing that they're like really worried about. It'll be like nods and Easter eggs and stuff like that at most, but like this is not, I do not expect like the Mario movie to then become like the centerpiece for the next Mario game or something like that.
No, definitely not.
And then we
definitely not.
We didn't touch on it really, but the like Charles Martinet is going to be involved in like cameo roles and stuff, and a whole bunch of people are out there like presuming that it's going to be like Wario or Waluigi or something like that.
Waluigi.
And I'm just like, whatever. I don't care about either of those characters anyway. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't understand the internet's fascination with those characters, but whatever. Sure. Go. Or it'll be like, oh, it's Chris Pratt, and then he gets like bonked on the head or something and suddenly sounds like Charles Martinet for like a beat and then goes back to just being Chris Pratt again or something. Like I imagine it's going to be something like that.
Yeah, I agree. That's all I got for Mario, though. We're taking it to the next step, which is shoutouts. Trevor, do you have any shoutouts before I get to mine?
I do. I want to give a shout out to, there's a video I actually watched like right before we sat down and recorded. It's something that caught my eye last week, but I didn't actually get around to watching it. But IGN, as part of their like 25th anniversary of IGN, they've been doing like a whole series of kind of like specialty articles or whatever. And they did a video called How Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the Opposite of All Superhero Movies, Art of the Scene, by Michael Swaim, and Chris Del Padre was the editor on this video. And it's basically like a 10, 11-minute video essay about the leap of faith sequence of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and talking about how, it subverts a lot of like normal superhero tropes in that like, triumphant moment for a hero. It's doing a lot of things differently compared to a lot of others. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and I will, take any excuse to talk about the greatest movie of all time, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and enjoy that. So yeah, shout out to that
slip
video.
That one in there.
I've said for a while now that like it's my favorite movie of all time, at least. So
yeah. Yeah, Into Spider-Verse is rad. It definitely is interesting. I'm definitely curious to check that out. I might do that later tonight. We could do a whole conversation. We could do a whole conversation around superheroes, and at some point in time, we actually will get all of us on board and do like a superhero conversation, and talk about like a lot of the big, great superhero films, whether it's Into the Spider-Verse or Superman 1, if you want to go that far back, right? Batman 89, Dark Knight, obviously. but Spider-Man 2. Yeah, Into Spider-Verse is a really, really rad movie. I'm very curious to see the sequel, and very curious to see how the sequel is received, because I do think there's a little bit of a Dark Knight, the Dark Knight Rises situation where, like, I think the margin of success for Into the Spider-Verse 2 is really small, because how do you follow that up? Right, I think it's part of the problem that the Dark Knight Rises came into, because Dark Knight Rises is actually a good movie. It just followed up what I would argue is maybe the greatest superhero movie of all time. Just a phenomenal movie in general in the Dark Knight, right? And the same is going to be true for Into the Spider-Verse. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll ultimately be an incredibly successful movie. Just like I think ultimately Dark Knight Rises is very successful, including the end, which is great.
I hope it's an incredibly successful movie. As we touched on when we did, was it Solo, or on that D Plus show, Spider-Verse unfortunately did not do great at the box office. It is easily the weakest of the theatrically released Spider-Man movies.
Very different, obviously being animated.
Obviously, but as well. At the same time, Venom is out there making $1 billion. Like, that's disheartening. Mm-hmm. But at least Into the Spider-Verse won the Oscar, and yeah, hopefully has like amassed enough of a cult following and a buzz behind it that the sequel will do better.
I think, yeah. Well, I'm very curious. Is all I'll say for that. Do you have any other shoutouts, or
nope, that's it?
That can be it for you. Then we get to mine. Hey, hi, hello. My name is Logan. I like James Bond. You might not know this about me. I keep it on the down low. Like I mentioned earlier, No Time to Die is coming out in the UK this week. The premiere is happening. Well, it's already happened. Actually, it's like
it happened at night. Yeah, I was gonna say it happened like this afternoon. Like I was seeing pictures from the red carpet around like 2 p.m. or whatever.
So there are lots of great James Bond stories to go read on the internet, and you should. It's a really interesting series. But the one I'm going to highlight is one from Maclean's, which is a Canadian news outlet that I enjoy, and it's just called The James Bond Film Franchise is Actually a Family Business, Meet the Broccoli's. And it goes into kind of the family history of James Bond, the Broccoli family, Barbara and Michael, and they're very hands-on control of that series. How Sam Mendes, stepping in for Skyfall and Spectre was very much the anomaly and the exception and not the rule in terms of a like strong director with a strong directorial kind of vision and drive. And how I think the exact word it uses usually Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, who are the husband and wife who oversee the James Bond series, hired hands for the directing role, just kind of get the job done. Yeah, I mean, it goes back into the roots of the series, going back to Chubby Broccoli back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, how he kind of helped groom his daughter and his stepson to take over once he would pass away, and how they've done that. It goes a little bit into their decision to step away from Pierce Brosnan, erroneously, some of us think, after his 4 movies, despite the fact that like the MGM executives didn't necessarily agree with it because they're able to overrule or out-argue anyone else in terms of the James Bond decisions. I thought it was super interesting. I thought it was super fascinating. I think I could talk at length and write literally hundreds of thousands of words about James Bond, and maybe one day do 25 podcast episodes about this series. But I think that one of the things I've long said is this idea of, the decisions that the series makes are very interesting, we'll put it nicely. And I think a big thread of that is the family dynamic of the Broccoli family kind of overseeing the series throughout the 6 decades almost, 6 decades as of next year, of the saga, right? And how maybe the only time where they were a bit more creatively free was back in the 60s and early 70s when it was a duo, and not just a Broccoli member, or in the early 2000s, mid 2010s, I guess, when Sam Mendes was brought on board. And they had an Oscar-winning director who could do something really bold and innovative like Skyfall. But I think it's a really good read. I think even if you're not a huge James Bond fan, you'll find it interesting because the James Bond series is super weird and super interesting. And it's got a lot of great backroom stories and behind-the-scenes tidbits that I find really interesting. And that would fill out a great like homework section or whatever it's called. I always forget on that D Plus show of like note things, fun facts. But that's my shout out for the episode. Otherwise, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have. Again, that is patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Go check out all the tiers, goals, gadgets, and gizmos over there. You can also go support us by going to youtube.com/thatnerdysite. Hit the subscribe button. Give us a like, thumbs up. Tell us what you like about us in the comments section. Just leave the video playing in the background while you do your homework. You can also go over to podcast services around the globe. Rate and review us on iTunes. Give us 5 stars. It really does help bumping us up the charts and getting us into more people's ears. And you can also go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest written features, reviews, previews, and every single podcast also goes live on the site as well. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, that D Plus show this month or this week kicks off. It starts October 1st, so it's going to be our Halloween month of that D Plus show. So we're going to be doing a whole bunch of Halloween themed spooky stuff. And we're kicking that off with specifically the zombies episode of the Marvel What If series, and we'll probably talk about Marvel What If like up to this point, but we're really going to focus on the zombies episode that came out a few weeks ago before diving into some of our other Halloween themed stuff later in the month.
I was going to say, do you have the rundown of what we're going to do for Halloween?
Yeah, it's starting with Marvel's What If, then it is, I believe, the Star Wars like Tales of Horror or whatever. Like they're doing a Lego Star Wars thing, similar to the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special that they did last year. So I believe that's week 2. Then the Muppet Haunted Mansion is going to be week 3. Week 4 is going to be Treehouse of Horror Simpsons. From The Simpsons. Yeah, we're gonna whoever joins me for that is gonna pick an episode, and we're gonna kind of do some fun Simpsons Treehouse of Horror stuff, and then we're gonna wrap up the end of the month with Halloween Town 2 as the follow up to you and me sitting down with Halloween Town last year.
I'm very excited for it. That and Treehouse of Horror are the ones I'm very excited for. Love the Treehouse of Horror specials. Yes, so go check out all of those as they're out over the month. I am very excited for the month of October and Halloween, watching things. It's a great time for movies and TV shows if you're The Simpsons. You can go find me at Lefty Logie or Lefty Loggy, Loggy on the internet. I will echo Trevor's shout out of that, and also give a shout out to last week's episode of that D Plus show where Trevor and Cameron, Frank, and Christian
did not join us.
Okay, the power was on Christian's house. Trevor, Cameron, and Frank did that episode on Star Wars Visions. I have watched Star Wars Visions. Trevor doesn't even know it yet. It is really interesting. I will go with, and yeah, so go check that out. It's really rad, and it's a nice little kind of post-cap, little PS for the summer of Star Wars that we did, and we still have another one coming in October as well for the Halloween special. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Sites, play your games, be good to each other, and class dismissed.